Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Alicia, and today we're going to be talking about The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba by Chanel Cleeton. As you can tell, this is a library copy. I've been using my library a ton for the past couple of weeks, and it's amazing because you don't know how much money I've saved. And it's great because I get to try out books without having to buy them, and then if I really like them, I can go out and purchase them and have a copy of them on my shelves. Lately, I've been in the mood for a little bit more historical fiction. It was actually a genre that I used to read a lot when I was in high school, which was years ago. And then as I started to get more into sci-fi and speculative fiction, historical fiction became a genre that I was uncomfortable with. And I don't know if it's because I just haven't read it in a long time, or just because anytime I pick up a historical fiction, I'm just really disappointed nowadays. So I was a little hesitant to pick this one up, but I adored it. I actually ended up picking up The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba as part of Brujas in Books. It is a Latina-run book club hosted by Naomi from Naomi's Library and Cami from Burros and Books. This was actually the book club pick for November, and that's why I decided to read it, and it did not disappoint. So I'm really glad that I ended up picking up this book. So what is The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba about? This takes place in the 19th century during the New York Gilded Age and then the Cuban War of Independence, which took place between 1895 through 1898. And actually the events in this book were inspired by a real historical figure called Evangelina Cisneros, who was dubbed the most beautiful girl in Cuba by Americans during that time. So in terms of historical context, this is set during the 19th century when the Spanish were occupying Cuba, and during this time there was also that rise in yellow journalism in the United States as the rivalry between two publication houses, that of Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph, really started to take off. With that, we saw a rise in newspapers that were sensationalized with eye-catching headlines and sometimes crude exaggeration. So that is the time period that this takes place in. The book itself is multiple perspective, and we are following the lives of three different women. The first of those, who is Evangelina Cisneros, who was falsely imprisoned by the Spanish in Havana after a Spanish officer made advances on her. Her friends did come to her rescue, and her friends were imprisoned. In the second perspective, we're following Marina. She is a Cuban woman who was displaced when the Spanish came and occupied Cuba. Marina had come from wealth, but early on she fell in love with someone who was below her station. She decided to follow her heart and moved out into the countryside with her husband. When the Spanish came, her husband ended up joining the revolutionaries that were fighting to free Cuba. While staying at home, Marina got caught up in one of the Spanish policies called reconcentración. Since during this time, the Cuban Revolution was led by a lot of campesinos, farmers who worked out in the countryside. They really wanted to mitigate the amount of people that were out in the field who could join the revolutionaries. So they did force campesinos who lived out in the country to go ahead and abandon everything or be killed and come and concentrate in the cities that were populated by Spanish soldiers. So Marina and her daughter have to leave their home, and they make their way to Havana. And so in Havana, she does become a courier, helping the Cuban revolutionaries send messages between each other. In the third perspective, we do follow an American woman called Grace. Grace is a newbie reporter who is trying to carve out a space for herself in this competitive world of journalism. Grace does secure a spot working for William Randolph Hearst, and there she begins to write about Evangelina Cisneros trying to garner American support to help the Cuban Revolution. So I did end up loving The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba. First of all, the story is extremely well researched. After reading it, I actually had to look up some of the historical context for this book because I was just so intrigued about this time period. The second thing is that the story is vibrant and full of authenticity. Chanel Cleeton does an amazing job giving an authentic voice to these women who are often forgotten and not talked about. She did an excellent job capturing their stories and their essence, their struggle, their successes, and a deep desire to also help their country. One thing that I did learn from this book, which is I think something that we all know but that is rarely discussed, is that war doesn't just happen out in the battlefield. It's not just about men going to war and fighting. There's a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes, stuff that is oftentimes left by women because historically they're often left behind and not allowed to join the army, and they do so much important work that is unseen while also facing danger. And so I do love that I got to experience the Cuban Revolution through the eyes of women. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that I was equally intrigued by every storyline. Just the way that she writes these women, they're all bold and independent and caring and just fully realized. In general, I am a fan of multiple POV stories, but oftentimes I'm more interested in one over the other. That was not the case here. I was interested in all three equally, and I feel like that's the first time that that's ever happened. Apart from the story itself and how expertly researched this is, the writing is just very beautiful. It's flowery enough that at times it feels poetic, but not so flowery that it's not easy to read. It's a very digestible story with very beautiful writing and very riveting and compelling storylines. So if you're a fan of historical fiction, this is one that I highly recommend you pick up. So Cami and Naomi will be having a live discussion for this book. The show is going to be on December 2nd, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Cami's channel, which is Burrows and Books. You can find the link below. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I am in a historical fiction mood, but I am also exhausted of reading historical fictions set during World War II. I feel like I've read too many of them. So if you have any recommendations for me, if you've read The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba or Cantoras, that was another historical fiction I read this year that I just absolutely adored. If you have any recommendations along those lines, please let me know down below. If you've made it this far, let me know down below what is your favorite reading snack. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!